Oh, you know it's going to be a good one when I've got my purple craft mat out. Hi, it's Ryan from Nights Around a Table, and this is the second episode in a series that I was tentatively calling Nice Bits. I didn't feel all that comfortable with it, so thanks to my funny friend Sean, I've renamed it Bits Please. Bits Please! So this is a series that is all about the additions that we can make to our board games to make them look really cool and feel really good to play. And if you watched the last episode, you'll know that I recently purchased a 3D printer. So that's what I think most of this is going to be about, the shenanigans I get up to with that, including this episode. Now I'm talking about Everdell, which if you know the channel, you know is my absolute favorite board game of all time. It's often accused of being overproduced, but for all its overproduction, there's still some interesting flaws with the game. Namely, these goofy resources, which in the original edition they decided to make perfectly cylindrical. So they roll all over your table, all over the board, they get away from you. And in the second Kickstarter campaign, I believe, they redesigned the twigs because enough people demanded it. And they made them sort of with a groove on them so they're flatter and they didn't roll quite as easily. So that was definitely an improvement. However, for some bizarre reason, they kept the perfectly spherical rubbery berries perfectly spherical. So as you can see there, they stay a little bit, they're slightly squished, but there's a lot of roll factor to those things. What you kind of need in Everdell is to have a bucket or a crate or something to hold all these rolly-aroundy resources, just to keep them in place at the top of the game board. And the very first thing I thought to make when I got my 3D printer was one of these resource holders for Everdell. Now, like I say, if you know me, you know that Everdell is my favorite game. If you know me even further, you know that I deeply dislike the publisher of Everdell, Starling Games, formerly Game Salute. My passion for how much I dislike Starling Games matches my passion for how much I like Everdell. And you say, Ryan, why? What did they ever do to you? Well, I've had a few personal disappointments in my dealings as a consumer with Starling Games, as have many other customers. I would characterize them as a customer hostile company. They seem very interested in their own profits at the expense of the experience of their customers. Case in point, there's this thread on Board Game Geek that went up about a year ago where people said, this is weird. People who are making aftermarket add-ons for Everdell using probably 3D printers and offering them up on Etsy are receiving cease and desist notices from the lawyer at Starling Games, telling them to take their stuff down, never mention Everdell, keep my name out of your mouth kind of thing. And a bunch of people jump onto this thread and say, oh my gosh, that's awful, that's ridiculous, how dare they? And after maybe half a page or a page or so of people railing against Starling Games, the official Starling Games account comes onto the thread explaining their legal position. And I don't know if this is actually one of Starling Games' attorneys writing this. We don't really know, but I'm going to try to do an impression of this person as if it's Starling Games' attorney. And this is what the attorney effectively says. Hey, look, we appreciate what you got going on with your creativity. You're creative people. We're creative people. We got this game. You got your little tchotchkes. Listen, baby, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You can still put your stuff up on your little online marketplace. All we're asking, and it's not a big ask, is that you don't include pictures of our games, that you made the things to accompany, and you don't use our logo, and you don't ever say the name Everdell. Yes, that's right, it does mean that if people search Everdell, they're not gonna find your stuff. But hey, that's fair. That's the law. What are you gonna do? We gotta protect ourselves. It's the law. In the ensuing bleep storm, many commenters are quick to point out that that is not actually the law. That's not how it works at all. And one person rightly points out that if you were an aftermarket car parts manufacturer and you made a part that fits the Ford Mustang, if you weren't able to say fits Ford Mustang, those trademark names, in your parts listing, in the description of the thing you're offering, there wouldn't be an aftermarket car parts industry. It couldn't exist. So for this individual to suggest that it's the law that you can't say the name of their game in association with the thing that you're producing that works with their game is, I think the legal term is bupkis. Now, this goes on for pages and pages and pages. You can read it yourself if you're interested. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'll link it in the description below the video. A lot of people jump on and are quick to point out that, yeah, Starling Games stinks, but the creator of Everdell, James A. Wilson, the designer, is a fabulous guy, top-notch guy, and a bunch of people come in and agree, yes, yes, he is. And that's kind of how I feel about Everdell and other sort of creative properties that have been tainted by the bad behavior of certain individuals involved with them. Like Felicia Rashad from The Cosby Show, she didn't do nothing. And I'm not suggesting that anybody at Starling Games is roofying drinks. That's not it at all. But by page 6, CEO of Starling Games, Dan Yarrington, gets involved. He jumps in with his hot take. And he says, look, I can't do a Dan Yarrington impression. He says, look, all we're trying to do is protect our trademark. It's what we're legally required to do, because if we let enough people, use it, then it waters it down. And so he's providing like the Kleenex or the Band-Aid defense. If it becomes common parlance enough, then you have not proven that you've protected your trademark well enough, and it could be taken away from you. But as good a game as Everdell is, I mean, get over yourself. It's not Kleenex. Dan goes on to explain that they will have official Etsy shops that offer authorized aftermarket pieces that you can use with Everdell. And this is where people kind of cotton on to like, no, okay, I get what's going on here. So the idea is presumably scare off everybody who's making parts for Everdell so that you can authorize a couple of shops and then presumably get a kickback from those sales. Now, the most recent Everdell Kickstarter campaign launched earlier this week, and it became even more clear what they were trying to do. Dan says that this has been in production for 1.5 years. This thread went up a year ago, so the cease and desist notice went out a year ago. And look at this. On the Kickstarter that launched this past week, look at one of the items that's on offer. This collection of resource containers for Everdell, which look a lot like some of the resource containers that unauthorized dealers were offering on Etsy. Aha! So of course the thread doesn't end here. A bunch of people pile on to Dan saying, you can't control everything that everybody makes and does and says about your game. You just have no legal recourse to bully these people and have that level of authority over what people make to enjoy with your game. And people further point out that people creating aftermarket parts for your game is a high compliment, and it increases enthusiasm and excitement about the game. Some people are quick to mention that nobody expects stuff that's offered on Etsy to be authorized or official stuff. Everyone kind of gets that it's small-time crafters cranking out stuff in their basements for little to no profit. So after pages and pages of this, of bad PR and people stomping all over Starling Games, and rightly so, I think, Dan Yarrington comes back and says, okay, we've talked to our legal counsel and we've clarified our policy. You can take a picture of your stuff with our game components in the picture. Oh, well, thanks, Dan, for allowing people to do what the law already allows them to do. He says, you can't use our logo in any pictures. The title of your listing has to say that it's unofficial, and you have to have some kind of proviso that Everdell is trademark Starling Games. Okay, fine, all the stuff that people would already be required to do under existing law that hasn't changed due to Starling Games sending out these cease and desist notices. If any of this leaves a bad taste in your mouth, rest assured this is only one episode in the storied history of Starling Games / Game Salute. There are many other threads that you can peruse. If this leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and it might, and it should, I encourage you, go buy another board game. There's absolutely no reason. They're at, cracking 1.7 million on the Kickstarter last time I checked. They don't need your money. They'll be fine without it. So go buy something else if you don't want to support a bullying, skeezy publisher like Starling Games. Me, I already own a copy of Everdell, so I'm going to make some cool stuff for it. And I tell you, I don't like the pieces that they have on offer. To be honest, I think they look a bit crude and lumpy. I'd like to see them a little bit finer, more refined. I don't know why that oyster shell has a pearl modeled inside it when it's meant to store your pearl components for Pearlbrook. It's weird, it's weird. And I've got a 3D printer, so I think I can produce exactly what I want for my own copy of the game. Let's go. So here we are at Etsy, which is a marketplace for crafty kind of stuff, and you can just type in Everdell, much to the chagrin of Starling Games, and a bunch of different things pop up. A couple of things are official and they say so, they're authorized. These acorns are really, really nice, but they weren't up, I think, when I was making this decision. And these are the sort of bulky, kind of gummy, goofy looking ones that are available on the Kickstarter that I wasn't too enamored with. But I've always liked the look of these things. These walnut shells, they look really cool. 23 bucks, Canuck bucks, but I think we can do better than that. So instead, I'm going to go to Thingiverse.com. Punch in Everdell. And this is where people make models for different things that you can just print out on your 3D printer. And look at this. Look at this. The exact same walnut shell, or very, very close to it, is available on Thingiverse. You just have to sign in with your account and hit collect thing, and you can grab those STL files. Amazing. Now, what I find really, really interesting, if we're talking about rights issues, is that if you scroll all the way down here on a thing that's on Thingiverse and you look at the license, it tells you what the author of the object intends for the use to be. And very often you'll find this $ with a slash through it in the Creative Commons license, which means you can't use this commercially. So I wouldn't be able to grab this model, print it out, paint it up, and then sell it on my Etsy store. I can't do it because the original designer of the model intended it to be for free to use for people. So if you look back, I don't know if this is the exact same walnut shell that you find here, but like that's pretty darn close. Maybe it's a little bit different because this is a smooth interior edge, but I'm pretty sure I have seen many times things that are available on Thingiverse that are available also on the Etsy shops, and they're definitely marked not for commercial use. So I don't know what to do about that. If you see something you really, really want, you don't have a 3D printer, you really want to buy it, maybe the solution there is to ask the Etsy seller whether they have permission to make it, or if you want to just go ahead and ask for forgiveness rather than permission, maybe you can buy the thing, and then on Thingiverse, whenever you download a file, watch this, collect the thing. You get this option to tip the designer. So maybe that's a solution. You know, you pay the Etsy shop owner a bit and then you pay some money to the designer, which the Etsy shop owner should really be doing. Now, if you had an FDM printer, you'd be ready to go. You just open it up in a piece of software and save it as a certain file and you'd be ready to print. But since we're printing on an Anycubic Photon S resin printer, you got to follow a couple of extra steps. So I'm going to open the file up, and there's the walnut. It looks really cool. This is the thinned version, so it's not so thick on the inside, and you get a bit of that walnut texture on the inside as well. Now, what you have to do is you have to print this with supports, and that's sort of like scaffolding so that things don't, this represents the build plate, which is the thing that goes upside down and dunks into your resin vat in your resin printer. So it prints what you're going to see upside down like that. So you could picture that it would be really difficult, I think, for it to build those layers and possibly build out. And if things kind of like pop into existence, like you have overhangs or you have characters with arms, things are going to print properly. So you need to print these struts. The other kind of rule of 3D resin printing is that putting things parallel to the build plate like that, it doesn't like these big flat surfaces because it doesn't do flat things very well, and it creates this suction force when it sort of like dunks in, up and down, in and out, and it goes and pops out, and it's possible that you could rupture this delicate film, delicate, expensive, difficult to replace film that you have on the bottom of the vat that it's dunking into. And if that rips and resin leaks into your machine, you are hosed. So one of the things you got to try to do is rotate your model in a different way. So maybe, you know, we could rotate it up like that, and maybe we could move it over here. I think we could fit more than one walnut onto the build plate. And anytime you see it go red like that, that means it's out of bounds. So you got to get it back in there. Oh, a little bit more out of bounds. So it's really, you got to play with it a little bit. Oops. This tab over here is where you create the supports. That's what it's going to look like, a little post with a stick, and it angles up and there's a little ball and it attaches to your model. So you can either do this automatically, or you can just start clicking where you think the supports should be. And this is sort of more if you're a little bit more advanced and you know where the supports need to go. These are thin ones, I think, but you can go heavy supports for bits that are going to really bog down and weigh on that build plate. Or if the model is like going to threaten to pull off the build plate, because remember, it's printing upside down like that. And it, you know, if you not got enough supports, the whole model could just like rip right off the build plate and splash down, and then it would be a bad time for all involved. It also will tell you, this piece of software, where it thinks you should add support. So these little dots are where it's like, nah, the model's looking a little bit heavy. You should probably stick some supports in there. So this is what I eventually came up with. I was able to fit all 4 walnut shells that I wanted onto the build plate at the same time. Pretty cool. And notice how it's putting supports inside. That'll come into play in just a second. So picture, I'm going to print it and I'm going to have to snap these supports off, and hopefully those connection points are weak enough so that it's not a big deal to just pop them off with my fingers, though you can use sort of craft snips or tin snips to get them off. I'm going to skip over the next part where I actually print this and show it to you coming off the build plate and snapping all the supports, because I was so excited to get these walnut shells printed. I didn't record any of that stuff, but in future Bits Please episodes, you're going to see that step writ large. What happened with these ones was that these 3 shells printed and then this one didn't. So then I just went and I took the file and I deleted all but one of the ones that I knew would work, and I reprinted it, and then I had all 4 shells printed just fine. So this is how those first 3 shells printed out. I was really happy with the results. Look how great they look. They're nice and detailed. Sorry, this is just a still image. But they don't have those lateral printing lines that you would get out of an FDM printer. I think they look really smooth and really great. However, when I pulled the supports off, I left little nubbins on the edges of the plastic. And this is because I shone UV lights on these models to cure them before I took the supports off. And I know better now. A better process is to wash them with isopropyl alcohol and then pull the supports off and then cure them, so that you're not trying to snap off hard cured supports. So before I do any painting, I'm going to have to file those nubbins down. Here I am in my old Whitland chair. There's a better view in the sunlight. You can see those little bumpy nubbins, those little barnacles sticking to the ends of the model, which aren't great. I'm not going to want to paint that because they feel prickly, and it's not nice to pick the model up. So let's fix it. And how do we fix it? Well, I picked up these really cool specialty sanding sticks that are pointy on one end and sort of rounded and blunt on the opposite end, and therefore precision detail sanding. They've got a strip of sandpaper that goes all around the outside of them, and they come with a couple of replacement strips for each one, and they go in different grit levels. So the red is the coarsest one, and then all the way up to black, which is the finest one. Red is 120 grit, and the black is 500. So really, I suppose you could get away with using just a flat piece of sandpaper for this, but I think that these will come in handy when I'm doing much more detailed work on more sort of miniature models, if you know what I'm saying. Now, I have been thoroughly warned that the dust that this resin kicks up when you sand it is not at all safe to get into your lungs, so trust that I'm wearing a mask while I'm sanding the pieces down. The next step was to spray paint them to get them looking something other than gray. And I had a lot of anxiety around this point. I just realized why. I don't think I've ever spray painted anything before in my life. I think this is the first time in my entire life I've actually held a can of spray paint and done spray painty things with it. And I always associate it with, naughtiness, spray painting things where things aren't supposed to be spray painted. So I don't know. My heart was in my throat as I grabbed this rattle can of brown Rust-Oleum paint and primer. I don't know if just paint would do it, because I don't know if just paint would stick to the resin. I don't have enough experience painting resin yet. But I shook this sucker up, and since this was my first time using a kind of spray paint, naturally, I wasn't a natural. So I held it way too close to the pieces, and I laid it on way too thick. And this stuff is supposed to go from wet to slightly tacky in about an hour. This is in my garage, and I live in Canada, so this is early March. The temperature is not that warm, so it took, I expected it to take a long time to dry. 24 hours later, and this stuff was still glistening, so not a great first attempt. This is the next day. You can see how shiny they still are. They're nowhere near dry, more than 24 hours later. So I'm going to flip them over and do the insides. But again, my spray paint technique is just not up to snuff. But here, look, I'm learning. I'm holding the spray paint can way, way, way further away. But the problem with this method, I think I'm going to need to get an airbrush, because with the spray can, you're supposed to hold it 12 to 18 inches away from the model. The problem with this is I kept spraying and I didn't realize there were parts of the model that I wasn't covering because my eyes are nowhere near the model. I can't see what I'm painting and what I'm not painting. So I think if I had an airbrush and I could actually have the model close to my eyeballs, I wouldn't be missing so many spots and it wouldn't take so many attempts to get complete coverage on the model. I'm not going to lie, it took a bunch of coats. I think this is a few hours later. One big change that I made is I didn't keep the box in the garage the entire time. After that first 24-hour ordeal, I started moving the box into my bathroom, which was heated with a nice space heater, and I put a fan on it so it was able to evaporate a lot of the paint a lot more quickly. All right, so after hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of paint drying, which I've spared you from, although watching this whole video is a little bit like watching paint dry, this is what I came up with. This is the final piece, the almost final piece. All right, here's what it's gonna look like with those resources in it. They're not gonna go anywhere. You're gonna shake this thing around. They're not gonna, oh no, they're going somewhere. Oh, you can't really shake it that much. You can't be too vigorous with it, but they look great. I think they look awesome, and I think they're gonna make a beautiful addition to my Everdell game. But you know what? I think I can make it slightly better. This evokes the essence of walnut, but it doesn't really look like a walnut. These are what walnuts look like. And I want to try to get this looking like that picture. And I think the way that I can do it is to bust out my little model painting kit that I used way back in an episode with my first time painting a model. So I think I know how it's gonna go. I think I'm gonna try to water down a dark brown or a black paint and do a wash over it. And then once that dries, I'm going to dry brush or stipple paint a lighter color just to bring out some of the highlights on the shell and hopefully get it looking a little bit more like that picture of real live walnuts. Now is a good time to mention that these 3D printers have really come down in price. That's the only reason I own one. If you want to pick a 3D printer up for yourself, I really like the Anycubic Photon S. And those sanding sticks are pretty cool too. I've got some Amazon affiliate links in the description below. If you click those and buy any of the things that I've mentioned in the video, your price is going to stay the same, it's not going to go up. But I'll get a small commission from Amazon that I'll use to buy more stuff for the channel to entertain you. Check it out, I'd really appreciate it. And this is how they look when they're on the board. That fancy model painting stuff isn't strictly necessary, especially with my rudimentary beginner's technique, but I do think it added a bit of dimension to the shells. So, what do you think? Was that worth the time and effort, or would you pay the XD bucks to the Kickstarter campaign to buy those resource holders that Starling Games came up with? Let me know in the comments, and I would also really like to know if you owned a 3D printer and you were a board game fan like I am, what would you make with it? Alternately, what is your favorite way to spruce up a game? That could be stuff that you're making yourself, or it could be parts that are available in the aftermarket that you found at your friendly local game store. What are the best bits to spruce up a board game that you have found? If you want to see me continue making board game content like this, there are 3 really important buttons I want you to click. They are the thumbs up button, the subscribe button, and the bell button to get notifications once you're subscribed. You can also click the thumbs down button if you don't like this kind of content. That's cool too. The algorithm doesn't know any differently and will think that my content is engaging whether you like it or not. And one more plug, one of the ways that I can afford the 3D printer and the plastic spools and the paint and all that stuff is because I have patrons supporting me on Patreon. If you want to be one of those people that fuels this kind of content, please head over to Patreon and consider tossing me $1 or $2, or $6, or $15. Could be $50. I'm not going to limit you. Thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Bits Please. Did you just watch that whole thing? Oh, hey, to 100% this video, click the badge to subscribe, and then click the bell to get notifications when I've got new stuff.